We're here today to unpack the unfolding situation at Heather Place and at future Heather Places, to draw lessons from the recent past, including the destruction of Little Mountain and the false promises at the Olympic Village, to provide an overview of how old lines of public funding are disappearing, which were won by past generations, and how new avenues need to be found, and to look to other models in other parts of the world that have robust public housing programs. So today's format, we'll begin with 10-minute presentations maximum by the panelists. After all of the panelists have finished, there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions from the audience, and I'll ask you to limit those to about 2 minutes. At the end, the panelists will have each a couple of minutes to make last comments and observations. And please, to all of you, observe the time limits so that everyone has a chance to speak. Our time here is limited today. We need to be out of here by 3:15, and I'll let you know when your time is up. So we'll begin by introducing Nathan Crompton. Nathan is an editor at the Mainlander and rank and file organizer with the Vancouver Renters Union. He's currently organizing with low-income tenants at Heather Place, the Glory Hotel, and Lions Manor. His articles on local housing issues have appeared at Rabble, West Coast Line, and the Mainlander. His art criticism has appeared in October and the collaborative writings of Coop.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. I want to acknowledge everyone and see I helped organize the panel, and we had some late confirmations from speakers that we absolutely couldn't turn down. So there'll be some really good speakers, but we'll all make sure we'll stay under 10, and you should make sure we do that. And Barry will make sure we do that as well. So my talk today is about Heather Place. Barry gave a short introduction about what Heather Place is. We organized the event here at 22nd and Heather because it is so close to Heather Place. Heather Place is just down the street. And it's close to us physically, but also in some ways close to the heart of what renters. Oh, hold this one. Check? Yeah. Okay. So my talk, sorry for anyone who missed it, my talk is going to be about Heather Place. Currently, Heather Place, it's an 86-unit development. It's affordable and social housing built in the 1980s. It sits 10 blocks north of us, 13th and 14th on Heather. Currently, Heather Place is run by Metro Vancouver Housing Corporation, and who runs the affordable and social housing. It's recognized as a thriving community of low-income and moderate-income tenants. However, currently, the managers and politicians who control Metro Vancouver Housing Corporation, which is a mix of Lower Mainland politicians and local Vancouver City Council politicians, have decided that they're going to go ahead with collaborating with the development community, collaborating with developers to flatten Heather Place and replace it with the vast majority of market condos and unaffordable housing. Just to be clear about what exactly that means, there's currently 86 units, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, a lot of family housing. Metro Vancouver is currently promising that 1/3 of those units will be replaced in the future development. So out of the 86, 1/3, which is roughly 26 or 27, will be replaced for subsidized low-income tenants. Subsidized low-income tenants will pay the same rate. It's rent geared to income for them, so they pay 30% of their income, and that won't change. There's two things to to say about this. On the one hand, there's a catch, which I want to talk to you about in a moment, but more importantly is what's happening to the other 2/3 of the housing. The 2/3 replacement housing, which is roughly the remaining 60 units, will be market development, market rate condos. There'll be apartments, there'll be two or three bedroom apartments, but fundamentally in the redevelopment, what's going to be lost is 2/3 of the current stock at Heather Place. So the rents are going to be anywhere from starting at $1,600, but likely higher, which means almost twice, more than twice as much of what the current rents are. I have 5 points which I'm going to fly through, and hopefully it'll give you a sense of what exactly is happening at Heather Place, and then we'll move on to contextualize Heather Place and position it within the city and questions of development across the city. So, the number one reason that Heather Place is being the number one reason that the redevelopment is being defended is because the repairs and the current state and the conditions of the housing at Heather Place. After 10 years of neglect, there's absolutely no question that the housing is in need of repairs. There's a fundamental need to put money and investment into the housing at Heather Place, and it's fundamentally in need of being repaired. At the same time, the housing is in fundamentally good condition. The housing is in much better condition than the private housing in the area. The housing is in much better condition than the housing in the lower mainland. The private housing stock in the entire lower mainland, particularly the affordable private housing stock, is all in poor and bad condition, is all in need of repair, and this is precisely why there's a housing crisis. Demolishing housing at that Metro Vancouver owns that has issues and necessary repairs needed is the absolute last way of solving this housing crisis. I want to say that if Metro Vancouver is able to defend the idea of demolishing the affordable housing on the basis of repairs, I think it sets a horrifying precedent for affordable housing both within the Metro Vancouver stock, because there's poor housing within the Metro Vancouver stock that's worse than Heather Place in terms of its condition and its state of repair, and a vast majority of private housing in the lower mainland. If Heather Place is allowed to be demolished, it's going to set a precedent where essentially any housing that's in middle and low income affordable category is vulnerable to the argument that housing that's not perfect should be demolished. Currently in Vancouver, there's a housing crisis, and what this means, above all, is that there's a housing shortage. The idea of removing large developments from the housing stock, the idea of removing hundreds of units at a time, like at Little Mountain and Heather Place, is the absolute last way you would want to solve the crisis of a housing shortage, particularly an affordable housing shortage. So, really quickly, I want to go through what precisely is the replacement deal. Its 64 units are going to be lost outright. Those are the 2/3 units, which are now going to be between $1,600 and $2,000. In those units, rents will double, which for us is unacceptable. And tenants who are already in a precarious position in those units are now going to be put in further precarious position of having to be displaced, moved around, moved outside Vancouver. They're going to experience uncertain futures, precarious living conditions, further entrenchment of poverty, further entrenchment of debt levels, and lack of futures for people who once called Vancouver their home. What's happening at Heather Place is a series of mixed messages coming from Metro Vancouver, whose purpose, whose only intention is to give renters a sense of precarity and uncertainty and make people feel unsure about what their position is. In other words, there's nothing fundamentally different from the experience of the people at Heather Place and the experience of a person experiencing a renovation in any private housing in Vancouver and the Lower Mainland. A rent eviction is precisely the process whereby the landlord threatens, usually for outright demolition, like what happened at 577, then usually backs off, then usually adds mixed messages, puts you in a state of panic, increases your anxiety, and eventually gives you the notice to tell you you're going to leave. In a moment, I want to quickly say why Metro Vancouver is actually closer to a private landlord than they are to a publicly accountable, publicly funded body. But for a moment, I just want to say why there's so much confusion and what the confusion, where the confusion is coming from. And it's partly because of the lack of commitment around replacing the housing itself. The terms that are being used by Metro Vancouver is that it's replacement housing, that this is going to increase the stock of affordable housing, and on the line. And the confusion comes precisely from the fact that the exact opposite is going to take place. More precisely, the confusion comes from the fact that Metro Vancouver, Jeff Niggs, Raymond Louis, the board of Metro Vancouver are making promises that are coming from two different, making contradictory promises, and I want to summarize one of the most important contradictory promises. On the one hand, they're saying they're going to replace they're going to allow all current subsidy tenants to move into the new project. All of the 1/3 current subsidy tenants are allowed to stay. On the other hand, market rent tenants, and it's not specified how many of these market rent tenants, are also going to be allowed to potentially maybe qualify for one of the subsidies if the new rent rates put them in the new subsidy category. On the other hand, which is a third hand, only 1/3 of the new units are going to be subsidized. So they're promising that all of the current 1/3 are going to be subsidized. Probably maybe some of the market rents are subsidized, but only 1/3 of the new units are going to be subsidized. It doesn't add up, it doesn't make sense, it's confusing, it's deceiving. It gives market renters the sense that they're going to be able to potentially qualify for a subsidy when they're not. However, there is one condition and one possible way in which they will qualify for a subsidy, and I want to give a sense of how backhanded this is. 1 minute, okay. The only possible reason they're going to qualify for a subsidy is because over the past months and the past years, Metro Vancouver has been removing low-income tenants from apartments that are in such bad condition and in such a state of neglect that the low-income tenants can't live there anymore. And once those low-income tenants leave, they're upgrading those units finally once they leave, then bringing in market rent tenants. What that means is that currently Heather Place isn't 1/3. Therefore, the only way all of this formula adds up is that the people who are supposed to be in the low-income tenants are now leaving an empty space where some, maybe 1, 2, or 3 market rent tenants are going to qualify for the subsidy that was supposed to go to low-income tenants. I'm just going to quickly summarize. My time's up, so I'm just going to quickly summarize how this is similar to the neoliberal strategy for housing in general. For example, at the Olympic Village, they're giving subsidies, which is $10, $30, $40 subsidies to people paying $2,000 rent, counting that as social and affordable housing. Absolutely, people who are paying $2,000 of rent need a subsidy, but it should absolutely not be named and called a plan to provide affordable, sustainable, long-term housing for people, especially not in the scale, especially not in the numbers that are needed in Vancouver in the midst of this housing crisis. Lastly, I just want to say one very quick point. It has to be understood that the housing at Metro Vancouver is not in worse condition. The housing at Heather Place is not in fundamentally worse condition than the rest of the housing in the Metro Vancouver housing stock. What's different about Heather Place is that it sits in a high-value area. It sits in an area that's slated for gentrification. In other words, the demolition and flattening of Heather Place is not about repairs, it's about injustice. It's about the fact that rich people want the property, they want the area, they want to live in the neighborhood. Furthermore, the politicians who sit on the board of Metro Vancouver, and the politicians who sit on City Council, Jeff Niggs, Raymond Louis, they are fundamentally a developer party that's supported through and through, A to B, A to Z, by the developers. They win elections by getting developers money. Now that they've been elected in 2011, they're turning around doing the necessary favors, and it's fundamentally about injustice and gentrification, and fundamentally not about repairs and adding to the stock of affordable housing. So thanks so much. That's my talk.
Thank you, Nathan.